Okay, looks like we are live on Facebook now. Thank you for joining us for yet another week of Mental Health Wednesday. Our topic has been consistent for the past few weeks. Ms. Lar, do you want to give us a kind of a short synopsis of what the topic's about specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I'd mentioned last week, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, which is really great. So, our topics have to do with raising mental health awareness and kind of going a little bit deeper into some of our topics that our students wanted to know about. In last week's survey, I had asked our students what mental health topic they really want to learn more about, and stress and anxiety was consistently at the top. Almost like 80% of our students wanted to know about stress and anxiety. Those are also relatively low level mental health issues because they're experienced so commonly by everybody. We all experience stress. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have mental health issues or an actual disorder, but stress is very common. It is an important and likely experience for everybody. So we might as well learn how to deal with it before it becomes anxiety.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you kind of outlined in the video the signs or symptoms of anxiety. I think a lot of folks may not know about, those signs and symptoms, meaning like, what are some things that indicate that you might actually be suffering from anxiety? So I really appreciate that list.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that anxiety is very physical, or that there are three components: this physical, how we act, and how we think. I know a lot of people who are like, "Oh my gosh, my stomach really hurts. I don't want to go to class today. We have a test today. I don't know why I'm like sweating." Like, it's because you're anxious. It's because you're worried about your test. And then on those days that you wake up and you've got a presentation for school and you just don't want to go, like you'd rather be absent and push it off, that's anxiety. That kind of avoidance, it stops you from doing difficult things in your life. And so thinking the worst, having difficulty concentrating and focus, those are all anxious symptoms.
Yeah, and I think I even further, like you broke it down to like what we're thinking, behavioral, physical. Obviously you mentioned those. So I think that breakdown, understanding those three components is a pretty big thing. Because like, physical is more actionable. We kind of directly see it and feel it. And I think for me, a sign of that is actually pulling my hair. So I didn't always do that. In college, this is a bad habit I picked up that was a big indicator and gave me a sign that I'm really having an anxiety attack, because I would literally pull my hair out, and it's been a bad habit. And I think I noticed that more often when I was actually studying for an exam or had an exam or a quiz even in college. And I was just like freaking out. And then I think thinking wise, I'm just like, trying to absorb everything all at the same time. My mind is rushing all over the place. Behaviorally, like I might see myself like there's a pattern of it that keeps repeating. Like for example, if I'm at my house, behaviorally I might like talk to myself and like walk around the room constantly. So that's a pattern, that kind of a trend that I might have noticed about myself. So I think I really appreciate the categorizing those three things and how it kind of indicates to me, okay, maybe I'm kind of suffering from anxiety right now.
Another thing about anxiety that I don't think a lot of people know is that it's just worrying, right? Worrying about something that you care about, whether it's you're caring about your grades, you're caring about the safety of your family, and you're worried whether someone's going to come home that night. I think the anxiety and worry can really manifest as like, I need to keep thinking about this because it makes me feel like I'm doing something about it. Sometimes when you feel like, oh, I'm worrying about my homework instead of doing it, it's weirdly like saying, oh, I care, trust me. But the thing that's really going to get your homework done is doing it, not thinking about what happens if I don't do it. What happens if it's late? Am I going to get an F on this? And so worry is this kind of false way to control what's happening. Same thing with pacing, biting your nails, touching your hair. It feels like we're doing something about what we're worried about, but we're actually doing nothing. which is really interesting. We're not necessarily doing anything to control our worry. So when you're really anxious, the best thing to do is to relinquish control. Say, I don't have any control over what's going to happen. I know that I'm worried. We can acknowledge that we're worried, and then we can let go of it and wait until something happens.
Yeah, and I also you break it down in different ways of areas of anxiety as well too. So I mean, situationally, like if we look at the setting that we're in,
Mm-hmm.
what's maybe the cause, the root cause of our anxiety? Where is it coming from? Is it, I mean, is it literally out of nowhere, or is there a cause and effect type of deal? So I really appreciate that breakdown as well, because I think a lot of folks might, generalize it and might think, okay, you know what, this is part of my personality. Like that's just something I do. Okay. And that's just part of my the nature of who I am, kind of thing, and make those assumptions. And if that's the case, man, I could see myself like, do I deserve to be in this situation that often? Do I really think that's part of me? This is who I am, so I'm just gonna accept it, kind of thing. So I think that's kind of dangerous territory to get in. I think that's where self-awareness really comes in and plays a big role.
Yeah, the self-awareness of what does make me feel anxious. I don't feel anxious when I'm eating, like I like the food that I'm eating, not feeling anxious about that. I'm not feeling anxious when I go to bed, but I do really feel anxious when I'm thinking about meeting up with my friends. Oh, no problem. Like we could be really anxious by, like, okay, I'm meeting my friends. What do I wear? How do I look? What am I doing? And so the worry is typically brought up by something in particular. You could worry about many things, or you could worry about just a couple things. If you're not worried about your friendships and relationships, but you're worried about school, or you're not worried about school, but you're really worried about getting into the car because you've been into an accident before or really recently and you're worried about it happening again. So we really need to have that self-awareness about what we care about, because what we care about, we might worry a lot about. But we can care about things and not worry so much when we're thinking about the things we care about.
I don't think, sometimes too, like I think one of those situations that makes me that comes up, surfaces in my head, is like sometimes, like it might be a completely different situation, different time, specifically different place, but some of those things that we had to go through previously might resurface.
Yeah.
There are things that might have triggered me from before that kind of got duplicated or replicated in some way, or maybe a certain person or a certain situation comes up and I see myself having the same type of like anxiety attack, if you will. So I think those are things that, we have to be conscious of ourselves and ask ourselves some very valid questions, and try to process through it. So I also really appreciate just suggestions on maybe how you might control your symptoms of stress and anxiety as well.
Totally. So the thing about anxiety is that it's very real and it's based in fear, kind of like what you just said. If you have had something bad happen to you, you're going to worry that that bad thing is going to happen to you again, even though it might never happen again. The example I like to give are earthquakes. We don't have any control over whether we experience an earthquake. We don't know when the next one is. And I could spend my whole life under a table waiting for an earthquake, but it also might never happen in my lifetime. So how long do I want to worry and attempt to control my fate? We don't know when the next earthquake is. And if I were just to stand under a door and wait for it and say, oh, I want to be prepared, that day might never come. And so that's a lot of energy. That's a lot of missed opportunities. That's a lot of things that we are inconveniencing about our lives over something that might never happen. And so when it comes to anxiety, I like to tell people, is this happening right now? Is this something that if you're worried about something, is it happening right now? Because if it's happening right now, then we can deal with it. But if it has yet to happen, then let's do what we can to avoid that happening, or recognize that we can't do anything about that happening. For example, if I'm worried about getting into a car accident, well, then I can drive safely. I can wear a seatbelt. I can take different routes. I can be slower on the freeway. There are things that are in my control, but I can't control what other people do and how other people drive. And so if I'm feeling anxious about that, then I can take deep breaths. I can slow down. I can remind myself that right now I am safe. Right now I'm not in a car accident, and I might never be in a car accident. So I don't have to worry about that right now. So just asking yourself, is what the worst case scenario, is that happening right now? Or am I here in this moment and I'm safe and okay?
I think there's two things that, if I'm correct, you're mentioning. It's being anxious of anxiety.
Yeah.
It's kind of a level of fear, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to deal with this anxiety again, but I'm afraid that if this happens or that happens, you're just like always on your toes, like on the edge of your seat. And then the secondary thing is like, what can I do that's preventative of that anxiety as well? So I think I really appreciate that as well. I mean, there are definitely things that we can do as we get to know ourselves better, like what type of situations might, cause us to have anxiety, who might it be, so on and so forth. So I think those are things that we have to consider when we think about anxiety, but also like no one wants to live in a fear of whatever it may be, whether it's anxiety or something else. No one wants to be, always on the, their tippy toes or the edge of the seat, waiting to think like, oh my gosh, something is around the corner. Like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with it kind of thing. Obviously, we want to be stress-free, anxiety-free. So that's why, these conversations are good to have. And obviously you talk about a couple quick ways to kind of help with your anxiety. I know you mentioned like paying attention to your body, paying attention to your thoughts, and really changing the circumstances. You have a level of control to change where it might lead to, rather than like always kind of getting stuck in a rut in that ditch where you're like anxious and stressful. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, anxiety is thought-based, which is like, if I could just change my thoughts. We sometimes hear it from our parents or our friends, don't worry. That's the worst thing we could say, because that's really hard to do, and that doesn't give you another alternative thought to have. And so the example that I give is that the way our thoughts control our feelings and our actions are really, really powerful, because anxiety is a thought problem. My thoughts are running away. And so if we could pay attention to our thoughts and choose a different one, which we all have the power to do, then we would be in much better shape. For example, I tell students, if they have a test sitting in front of them, the test is being passed out, and the first thing they're thinking is, I'm going to fail. I didn't study enough. I'm such a failure. I'm so bad at this. Those thoughts are really going to get into your head. The next thing you know, you start to feel bad, scared, anxious. And then throughout the whole test, you're looking around, you're distracted, you're looking at your teacher, you're thinking, does my teacher know that I am absolutely about to fail this? It really dictates how we feel and how we show up. If you could choose a different thought, it changes the whole situation. So the test comes out in front of you, and you very mindfully say, I care a lot about this grade and I'm afraid of failing, but I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna try. I studied enough. I'll study more next time. And suddenly maybe you're calmer, you're less tense, you're slowing down, you're more concentrated, and you're able to recall the things that you studied because you're in a calmer state. Anxiety can really be debilitating, and it's really, like I said, thought-based. If we could think differently, think alternatively, imagine a more positive outcome, we can actually get there.
Yeah, I think often when I had folks that are trying to help, but things that didn't help me, that might help for some people, but for me, a lot of folks would be like, calm down. I'm like, dude, you're making it worse right now by saying that. I can't calm down. I mean, there are some people, if they said that, it might, work for me in some cases, because that relationship is different from others, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's always the best to just like rush into those type of like um general kind of remedies, if you will. So I think it's also good for you to understand, like, understanding again what setting works for you, the
Yeah.
type of people that you trust and love that will, ensure that they, you're taken care of.
Yeah.
But also it starts with you. Like,
Yeah.
you have to, like, again, analyze yourself, what's going on, and change the ways of how you process things. Okay. I think dependence on other people is not the safe bet, because it always starts with you. I think you have to really look at yourself, find those little things, little traits about yourself, and I think um, find solutions, and not just one solution. I think I would recommend several solutions, giving
Right.
yourself multiple outlets, not just one, because if you just depend on one, I mean, at some point it's gonna run its cycle, and then you're going to overuse it, and maybe it's just not going to work at all completely, and then you're left trying to figure out, maybe when it's too late, when it's like, I don't know what to do now, and it leads to other symptoms of this
Yeah.
and that, not just anxiety and stress. So I think
Mhm.
it's really important to catch yourself too. I think in the process, in the moment, situationally, there are windows. I think of it actually as an athlete. As you're playing there, like, if for example, for a pass, there are certain windows that you notice unfolding in terms of situations you can anticipate. In some cases, sometimes, like you mentioned before, it just blindsides you. But how are you going to react? What are you going to do? What are you going to say? So on and so forth, for yourself first, and then those around you. So I think that's incredibly important to catch, and build those reflexes.
Yeah.
It's not just going to happen like that. It's going to take you time to realize the situation, what's actually the context of the situation, what's actually being said, what's actually being done, and then what it should be, or what do you want it to become, essentially. So I think, as a student, I mean, even as a teacher too, but as a student, like, getting anxiety, studying, testing, like, maybe even think about your life and career, college. Like, I know sometimes, like, students, especially through the pandemic, mostly being virtual, you're at home, you're stuck, there's not really much you can do. Just sit in there, talking to yourself, essentially, or just your parents or sibling. There's not much support you can get aside from that. I mean, I'm sure they're available for you, but like, maybe you need more support. It's okay to, like, think about, okay, why is this not working? What might be some alternatives? Maybe I can try to go through different avenues, like trying new things. I mean, we've talked a lot about a variety of topics.
Mhm.
um but like, how do you communicate with yourself too? I mean, talking to yourself sounds weird, to be honest, but most people actually need to do that more, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Like, it's awkward for me to look at a mirror and like talk to myself. That's honest, like, are you crazy? But at the same time, like, you should be comfortable with talking to yourself. Like, how do you feel about yourself? How do you feel today? How do you feel about how you look, and all those things? Those are very, general questions you can ask yourself. If it's better to write it down, we've suggested, like, actually notating it down. Does it take the form of like artwork? Would you rather try to find, explore yourself through art, through activities? We've talked about that. So I think it really comes down to breaking down who you are
Mhm.
and trying to seek that out.
Mhm. You mentioned, if I could go back and tie it all together, there are these like windows, right? You said that when in a situation you're like, oh man, I could have done this, I could have done that. There were so many, I could have done, yeah. And I think that's very helpful, that kind of reflection, realizing what we could have done so that next time we could try to implement it better, like, different coping skills or these exit strategies, or like, ooh, I was really irritable and tired and tense, and then I snapped at my friend or my mom. And those are the moments when you're like, "Ooh, I should have gone on a walk before this, actually." And so with anxiety, actually, I like to tell people, like, let's imagine the worst thing that happens. Okay, you're really nervous about your test, and let's just say you get an F. What happens then? And they're like, "Oh, I don't know, the world's about to end." No, I'm like, really serious. What happens then? They're like, "I'll feel disappointed. Maybe I'll have to talk to my teacher. My parents will find out." And I'm like, okay, let's slow down. When you do talk to your teacher, what would you like to tell them? That I was really nervous and I didn't study and I didn't sleep well? Okay. So now you've talked to your teacher. Let's talk about your parents. What would you like to tell them? So really imagining that the worst isn't going to happen. The world isn't going to end when these anxious things happen. We do have strengths. We do have coping skills. We do have support. If the worst thing that happens, are you still safe? Are you still okay? Are you still loved? Do you still have a place to live and food to eat? We need to go into these basics and say, like, yes. If the answer is no to any of those, then absolutely we need to ask for help, because your anxiety is out of real fear that your physical safety is in danger. But if there's just this perception that the world is going to end if you get a bad grade, let's just talk through it. Let's figure out those window points where you can use your strengths, use your community, and say, like, yeah, I can get through difficult things. I don't need to be anxious or necessarily preventative around bad things happening, because I can get through it if it comes up.
I think you bring up another point. I think at the end of things, like maybe a solution that you've been coming up with, maybe some of those things are not working anymore too. So I think there are points where you're gonna realize, okay, that's not gonna, like I remember like certain situations, depending on how strenuous it might make it for the situation for me, trying to navigate through that, how hard it might be to deal with something. Like listening to music was one of my like escape routes, but it wasn't enough in certain situations. So I think when you realize, when certain things don't work, also, it's that whole reflection process all over again. And instead of like getting in too deep. So I know sometimes like some of us might sleep out. Actually, a lot of us might just sleep it off. But that can actually be more problematic, because if you just try to sleep it off, it doesn't exactly solve the situation. Like it's still there. You have to tackle it. Okay. Right. So some of those things we have to tackle straight on. So coping can be different as well, depending on the situation, where we have to, it can't just lie there. I know we kind of mentioned it last week too. Like we have to go into it and know how to navigate through it. And
I think the phrase is, the only way out is through.
Yeah. So that's a different situation, but those are the types of things that we want to kind of anticipate in some way and be ready for it. But at the same time, if we're not, it's okay. Like no one's perfect. Don't add another level of stress. Like, okay, I'm this person, I went through all this, I'm this old, or whatever reason it may be. It's okay if you're human and you make mistakes, or you slip up, or you don't recognize something. Like it's okay. There's always something you can still do after the fact. So I think those are things that are really important. Obviously, we want to reduce the amount of stress and anxiety for everyone, not only students, but parents, teachers. This has been a very peculiar year this past year, and it's coming to a close within the next few weeks. So we definitely want to make ourselves available as a staff and our wonderful counselor here, but also for the summer when we leave for school. Obviously, we want to come back refreshed, rejuvenated for the next school year, whether it be at Alpha or somewhere else. I know some of our 8th graders are going to be transferring to different high schools across the area. So, we want to obviously best prepare you for those things, but you also got to take initiative as well.
Yeah, the last week of school for our last Mental Health Wednesday, I'll be talking about what does treatment look like? How do you get help? Do you go to your friends? Do you go to your church? Do you go to your community? Or do you maybe seek out medical attention? And so that is going to be definitely something we talk about the last week, in order to help connect people with the possibility that they would be open to therapy and counseling, in the same way that if your foot was broken, you'd go to the doctor. If you're struggling with anxiety and depression, please go and see a therapist, and it's really okay, and it could be really helpful. So that's what we'll talk about the last week.
Cool. Thank you so much. So again, we always leave with that note. Again, you can always reach out to any of us and our friend here as well that we see that on Ms. Laura's lap. Yeah. But we don't want you guys to ever feel like you're alone. Okay, there's always somebody to talk to, a resource or tool that you can use. Make sure to reach out. That includes parents and teachers as well. As we're closing out the year, again, please take advantage of the tools and resources and the personnel that are available for you. We obviously want to have the best interests of everyone in our community. Yeah. So that concludes our discussion today. We look forward to these next few weeks. Let's end on a strong note. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.